Well, Lauren, welcome to South Africa.
Thank you.
Have you enjoyed your stay so far?
I've seen a lot of lovely things, but unfortunately, because I'm doing a documentary on farm murders, I've seen a lot of really terrible things as well. So I can compliment South Africa on having some amazing people and amazing scenery, great food as well, but you got a lot of problems here.
Yes, and well, they're not all of our own making, because I do blame a lot of the other Western countries for having plunged us into this experiment. I always say that South Africa was really the first example of regime change over the last few decades. And, and initially it seemed as if ours wasn't going to go the wrong way, but it has, and terribly so. But you're quite a young person, and it seems that your generation has now, well, there's that sort of cliche woke. I mean, what has become woke or woken up. Quite a lot of your members of your generation have come so over the last few years. And what do you ascribe that to, and what happened to you personally that sort of gave you a sudden shock? And the serialists used to call about the shock of recognition.
Right.
And what gave you that shock of recognition?
Well, I think people were able to ignore the underlying problems that have come with liberalism, postmodernism, multiculturalism for a while, because they hadn't quite seen the results of it yet. But our generation is just on that edge where they're starting to see what this experiment is looking like. They're starting to see in their schools, I'm being forced to call my teachers and my fellow students 46 different genders. This doesn't logically make sense. They're starting to see I can't walk into certain neighborhoods without being spat at, not being served, or even being called names or attacked if it's something like the suburbs of Paris these days. And certainly with like the multiculturalism, I don't know if a society that says you should be allowed to live for being gay can be cohesive with one that says you should be thrown off a roof for being gay, right? And they're all looking at this and saying none of these equations are quite adding up. And as it gets more and more prominent, you see protests in the street, you see riots. It's impossible for us in the age of the internet, when we see all of these things on our TV screens, because people they didn't quite have TVs, the technology before, to see all the protests, to see all these things recorded. Now we're forced to confront them, and we're asking these questions. Is multiculturalism going to work? Is postmodernism a great idea? And we're not getting the answers we want, so we're getting more and more curious.
Yes, and there's a palpable physical threat as well, because it's all very well to theorize about all these things, but one day you get mugged or you get attacked in the street. Over here in South Africa, a lot of people do get attacked in their cars, for example, and they get. I know of a young girl, probably a bit younger than you are, and I mean, she drove past one of these multicultural areas, we might call it that, and then a guy threw a huge rock through the window of her car and broke her arm in the process, and also stole her laptop and other valuables from the car. And once you get hit by an incident like that, it is a shock to you, and then it starts to, it sets your mind going, and why do these things happen? What caused them? And why didn't anybody warn me about that?
It's been very bizarre for me to see how people live here in South Africa. And I mean, I keep thinking to myself, is this how I'm going to have to live one day in big cities in the US or in Europe? I mean, I've gone to people's houses while I'm filming this documentary, and they're living in homes surrounded by electric fences with constant cameras around it. Not just cameras, they've got guns ready. They've got alarm systems that will go blaring, lights, everything. And that's just how they live on a day-to-day basis because of this. And I mean, I guess if I were living, I've been in places like the suburbs of Paris where I see videos come out where police officers can't even drive into these areas because they'll be beat up. They say, "Get out of here. This is our land now." It's a very dominant culture that is not compatible with Western culture that is coming in droves to places like France. And if that becomes more than just the suburbs and becomes the regular neighborhoods, will people in Europe one day have to live like how some people have to live in South Africa with electric fences? I mean, where we are right now, just in a hotel that's surrounded by an electric fence in Johannesburg. Like, this is something I never would have thought.
Yes, and every building and every shopping centre has got heavy security and security guards wandering around and walkie-talkies and so on. So it's sort of an incarcerated society or something. A Frenchman some years ago told me, he sort of paraphrased Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and he said, in South Africa, man is born free, but he lives behind bars in his own home. That kind of thing. But you've been, you've witnessed some of the great kind of battles or protests in the US these past few years in Berkeley and you weren't in Charlottesville. But
I was not in Charlottesville, but I was in Berkeley. Yes.
Yes, and you've had something similar in New York as well.
Yeah, things are heating up on the political front among the youth. I don't think anyone is satisfied. They're all feeling very disaffected, like their governments aren't supporting them. If they're on the right, they kind of recognize where a lot of these problems are. The governments have become so generous with strangers, they're no longer sustainable for themselves, and their freedoms are being taken away. On the left, they attribute it to, everything is white supremacy, everything is oppression, and just no one is satisfied. They have no identity, they have no understanding of what they're supposed to do. So the problems in America are very much so, I mean, unless we're talking about Black Lives Matter riots, between Antifa and such, are ideological schisms between young people who are very disaffected from the political world. The problems in South Africa are at a far more dire stage, I've found.
Yes.
And very much so the reality of quite far left policies being implemented. I mean, you were telling me, like, the ANC, these are people that would have been on terrorist watch lists before, wouldn't they?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and then it's even considered kind of a good thing on your CV if you've done some time in prison, or if you've put a bomb in someplace. I mean, that's considered, you've done something for the struggle, so-called. But if you've killed a few innocent people, I mean, that's considered a recommendation, and that can get you a promotion of some sort,
It's for people, I find a lot in America and Canada, you really have to, like, when people are trying to explain why something like feminism is a problem, they'll be like, okay, imagine if the genders were reversed. Imagine if men were having protests where they were demonizing all women and telling them they're all rapists, such and such. Then everyone's like, oh, okay, that's kind of bad. So how I like to look at the situation in South Africa to explain it to Americans and Canadians is, imagine if Donald Trump, who everyone says is a white supremacist, all these things, terrible, gonna kill everyone. Imagine if he actually went on a stage and said, we're gonna confiscate all Black people's land. We're going to take it away from them. Oh, and not only that, I'm going to have political rallies where I brag about shoot the boar, shoot shoot blacks.
Yeah.
Imagine if he was saying that. That's happening here towards a comparable almost minority, because you're about 8% Afrikaners,
exactly.
Around 8% African Americans are about 13% of the population. But that's actually happening here.
Yes.
The exaggerations people are putting on Trump are actually real towards parties like the ANC and certainly the EFF, this extreme radical Marxist party, which has 10% of the vote. It's shocking.
Yes. But I always think to myself as well, imagine, I mean, at the moment, lots of left-wing pundits and so on are calling white Americans, they're accusing them of racism and talking about institutionalized racism in the USA. But imagine if affirmative action had to work the other way around, that it would apply to the majority. It would benefit the white majority in the USA, and it would be a form of discrimination against the minority. So that, you know, a black person couldn't start a business in the US without having a majority white shareholder in his business, and he wouldn't be able to find a job in the government. He wouldn't be able to work for a big corporation because there would be a quota for white Americans at the corporation, and you know, up to 80 or 90% of employees would all have to be white by law. Imagine if that had to be the case. I mean, what would people say in the USA?
Yeah, people would go absolutely nuts. They would not stand for it for a second. One downside, I think basketball would kind of suck. But no, but seriously, it's the most unreal thing I've seen here, and it's causing. I recently went to a white squatter camp where people are getting laid off their jobs. These are educated engineers,
yes.
and they're being kicked out of their jobs.
Yeah, I mean the worst
white.
example. You know, some of the worst things I heard over the last few days was that. I mean, I know somebody who's got a whole project for. You know, marginalized white people who've lost their jobs and so on like that, and he's bought a piece of land, and they're going to settle something like 230 families in wooden houses there, houses they built themselves and so on, and they're going to import special green toilets from Sweden, where the urine would be recycled and then used as fertilizer and so on, because they're going to grow their own food as well on a piece of land. And they've already started they've built the 3 first cabins, you know, for these people to live in. And then the municipality of Pretoria turned around and told them, you don't have planning permission for that, and you'll have to break it down. We're not going to allow this.
And what's terrible about that is I interviewed some of these people, and they can't stay at any of the other government hostels, anything. They just look at them and they're like, "You're white," and turn them away. And so they literally have nowhere to stay, and then they're shutting down any of the individual projects to help these people, not even government funded. And even if they did set up everything totally legally perfect, they would never get any funding from the government. That's just like wildest dreams. I came into this to do this documentary. I had heard things. I've even kind of told people, I was like, don't exaggerate the situation. I'll find out on the ground what's going on. We'll see. I wasn't sure what I was going to come into. I wasn't sure if it was going to be exaggerated or what. And I mean, I've just been pretty blown away, to be honest. I've been blown away. And the documentary I'm doing on this that we just did an interview for, I think is going to be really shocking for a lot of people to see what's actually going on the ground here.
And what drew you to South Africa in the first place? Because, you know, sometimes I've got the impression that we're almost the antipodes of the world. You know, we're way down south here in Africa, and if you look at the world map, you know,
right,
just south of us is the Antarctica.
So the end of the earth.
The end of
fall
the earth.
off.
Yeah, you fall off kind of. You go any lower. But yeah, I mean, what piqued your interest in us in the first instance?
I've been wanting to come for a while. I even booked tickets to come here at the beginning of the year, but something else happened, and I'm like, a lot of it. I look at it, I'm like, it's so damn far away. I think everyone thinks that it's so far away, and we don't get a lot of news about it. We don't get a lot of media about it, so we don't hear about a lot of the political situation, how bad it is. But I kept hearing whispers of this kind of insanity going on here, and that's what piqued my interest. Whenever there's something that is not being reported on by the mainstream media, or you never hear about it in the mainstream media, and every once in a while you hear people say there's something big here, usually that's because when there's smoke, there's fire, and the mainstream media is really trying to waft away that smoke right now and make sure we don't see what's going on, because it really does seem like a kind of warning for what could happen in the rest of the West with these clashes of civilization. I mean, people have to understand it's just how different some of the groups here are. I drive through certain townships and you'll have like no Afrikaners there because these are communities that they believe in witch doctors and they've got their faces painted of magic and everything. And like that's just not compatible with a lot of Western values. That's not compatible with so many views in modern society. And this clash of cultures has been shocking to watch. And when we have such massive immigration coming into Europe so quickly, too quickly, so that no one can even remotely assimilate a little bit. I mean, how do people expect that to work?
And of course, in this century, the population of Africa is going to expand from about 1.2 billion to 4.5 billion. Mm-hmm. So half of all people on Earth will be Africans, and they will be coming from here. And I mean, there's hardly, I would say, north of South Africa up to the Sahara. I mean, you've got, at a guess, you probably have the same amount of infrastructure as you've got in one tiny little European country like Belgium, or not even. I mean, if you count all the roads and railways and so on. So there's obviously not enough infrastructure and economy in Africa to support 4.5 billion people, and therefore they will have to move somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And and that's why I think the whole planet will become like South Africa quite soon. Mm-hmm. And how are you going to cope with that is a big question.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's certainly something I don't know what to do with the information I've learned here. I don't know what to.
So it's almost
make sense
information overload.
It is. It really has